So today, instead of the usual quick battles or my own tournaments, myself and Dacder will be casting the Blind Man's Cup tournament, where you bring 3 preset armies to play in a best of 3 against your opponent. Looks like today we have 51 players signed up, and we'll be covering the later half of the games. So that's both semifinals, the finals, and as many of the top 8 games that we can cover. I am joined, of course, by Dacder. Hello, if you have anything to say.
Uh,
Yeah.
Hello, I guess. Good morning, everyone.
Yep. So there we go. I think that's about all I needed to cover. So with that out of the way, we'll be jumping into the games. So for our first best of 3, we're jumping in halfway into the match between Icepower and Pugnobon, with Pugnobon bringing an army of greenskins up against Bretonia. And for him, he has a mass goblin archer build. He's of course brought the rusty arrows for that armor debuff, and the rest is just night goblins and goblin archers. His front line consists of big guns and entirely of big guns. The mix between the unarmored savage orcs and the armored the armored just standard orc variants. His leadership consists of 2 river troll hags with presumably different spells, indeed, looking to just have some extra mithers in this army. Could be effective versus Bretonia. Warzag 2 without his net ability, actually, but with 2 spells, just the 2 usual AoEs that you can take on them, cheap variants.
Interesting to see the triple caster.
Mhm.
On the other hand, Icepower coming in with the Fey Enchantress and Double Paladin, pretty much good in every single matchup, so it makes a lot of sense. He has 4 peasants, 4 men-at-arms with shields. He has also 4 peasant bowmen, 2 of them with pox arrows, 3 Knights of the Realm, a regular questing knight, and the ROR Companions of Canal, which makes a lot of sense. It's a very solid generalist build. And I will say, I think it's probably quite favored against what the Greenskins have to offer, but we will see.
Yeah, I think the main deciding factors here is that cavalry. Given enough cycle charging, they'll have more than enough to really run over the infantry of the greenskins. But with double mither, you will likely expect some of the cavalry getting caught up in a long fight against big guns. Of course, big guns bringing in that anti-large that you can see in the bottom left. It is quite a bad fight for the cavalry to get into. So we'll have to see. The goblin archers too. How do you feel about them? They'll surely be good against peasants.
Well, I think their main use will be punishing cycling cavalry, shooting them in their back as they retreat. But Goblin Archers do have pretty short range, and they don't actually have great AP, unlike their Savage Orc or Orc brothers. So they'll definitely have to pump in a lot of fire in order to do significant damage. Uh, I think the main thing here is that the Greenskins will have to just use their control tools that they have extremely well, and also some really big Vile Tides could be nice if Icepower happens to blob up.
Yeah, for sure. And that's going to play a pretty large part. Since blobbing up with the cavalry, of course, loses your very important units. And blobbing up with infantry means that all the savage orcs will be able to engage the cavalry quite easily, because that infantry support is oh so important for the cycle charging. Now, there's actually no skirmishing going on, but it looks like we're seeing some very aggressive plays from Icepower here, charging straight in with his cavalry into the savage orcs. They don't have charge bonuses or charge defense, and And they take a huge amount of damage to start off the battle, but the knights also take a fair share of damage too.
Yeah, it's actually a lot of damage under these Knights of the Realm from the archers that are firing into their backs as they retreat. And the orcs, the savage orcs especially, actually have such a high charge bonus that they can trade quite well with cavalry on the charge, funnily enough. So I think that was a bit over aggressive for sure for Icepower. You can see one Knights of the Realm unit pretty much dead actually from this. And now it's the hero squad coming in. And I do think that the Fey Enchantress has a high potential to just hard carry this game more or less by herself. Her Mortis effect will be quite deadly for this mass infantry, and I'm not sure if the River Troll Hags have what it takes to duel her and take her down very easily, especially with Paladin support.
Yeah, and now we're seeing one of the major problems here for the Greenskins. Now that their front line has actually collapsed, a lot of these Goblin archers are going to be having a hard time. Some
Yeah,
cavalry left in the back too from Icepower means that he'll be able to pressure the goblins if they do begin retreating.
yeah, we can see this devolving into kind of an ugly blob fight in the middle here, as you oftentimes would expect. The thing is, the Fae will be getting a ton of value from her Mortis strain in this situation, just because there are so many targets in such a small area. However, the Greenskins are somewhat stabilizing on the one flank, and if they can keep these 4 archers online, they will be able to punish the Bretonian cav very heavily, and without any cavalry support, the Fae will eventually be dragged down.
Yeah, and the one of the paladins already getting routed off. Looks like the Fey Enchantress too is getting surrounded by the hero squad. Uh, just because it seems like they're having a little bit of a hard time staying close together and also having that infantry support. Now, if the Fey Enchantress does manage to survive in the center here, she will be able to mortise down a lot of the savage orcs. Knights 2 coming in through the back means that the Goblin Archers should likely go down soon, but we'll see if those knights actually manage to keep it together.
Yeah, and really good use of Mither and Spirit Leech is dragging down pretty much all of this cavalry. You can see what little remains is very tattered. However, because the focus of the Goblin Archers has been exclusively on the cavalry this entire game, the Peasant Bowmen have actually been able to sit in the back and accrue really good value, firing into this huge blob formed by the hero squad.
Yeah, and it's paying off now with both of the savage orcs getting routed off and a turn of the tables where now it's the greenskin heroes that are having a very rough time. Now, on the verge of breaking, the Fey Enchantress too, still at very high HP, means that it looks like this will probably be the deciding play coming in for Bretonia.
Oh, and a Chalice of Potions actually does a lot of damage just to put a stamp on this game, as we're about to hit army losses, I believe, and with that, we'll be going to an ace match.
That should be quite fun. At this point, the Bretonians definitely have the large mobility advantage, so there is not much in the way that Greenskins will be able to pull it back. So that will be GG, and we'll be moving on to that ace match now. Any comments on the factions that we'll be seeing?
Well, I will take a look now. It appears to be Skaven from Icepower. Makes a lot of sense. They are at a very powerful state in the meta. They're able to deal with pretty much every faction quite effectively, and they have some, very powerful tools that you can build around and expect for those tools to do well against pretty much everything. On Pugnobon's end, it will be dwarves. So now this is, of course, one of the worst matchups in the game: dwarves against Skaven. however, however, to be fair, the Skaven are not able to tech specifically into their anti-dwarf units, particularly Death Runners, which are normally what makes the matchup so impossible. It will actually be, it looks like, a build with 2 Poisonwind Mortars, Throt, and a Packmaster as kind of the core against a mass ranged, ultra wide Expo build. from Pugnobon. It with actually maxing out with the 12 ranged unit cap. So I am actually pretty curious to see how this goes.
Yeah, the double poison wind mortars will be quite scary, but we'll see if they get run over by the dwarf infantry. So for the ace match, starting off with Icepower Total War, he's brought a Skaven army that consists of a Packmaster. No, Throt and a Packmaster. Looks like the Packmaster is fully decked out with all of his items and abilities, while Throt 2 also has all of his abilities. Some nice anti-large buffs, and also Rat Ogre Summon and healing that he'll be able to throw on himself. For his main DPS and artillery, he has brought 2 Poison Wind Mortars that are great versus many a faction, and it's going to be about defending them. To do that, he's brought many Clan Rats, many Skaven Slave Spears, and also Rat Ogres for a mass. Very nice versus cavalry, and also very nice versus the armored troops of the Dowie that we'll be having Dacder take a look at.
So he's come in ultra cheap with the Ruin Lord, only with the Rune of Wrath and Ruin. Then he actually splurged a bit on his infantry, as he has 5 Longbeards and 0 Dwarf Warriors or Miners, so relatively elite. I mean, these are mid-tier infantry, but you normally don't see just 5 of those. He has 1 Slayer, not the Dragonback Slayers, but just a regular Slayer. Then he has 4 Rangers, 5 Crossbowmen, and 3 Thunderers to make up this mass ranged build. And it will be a lot to protect against this horde of rats. However, this kind of DPS surely is enough to burst down any threats that come too close, especially if Throt comes in and is hit with the Rune of Wrath and Ruin. I do think it will be quite easy for the dwarves to take him down very quickly.
Yeah, it'll really depend on how quickly he can actually advance here. Also, I forgot my cinematic smoothing. Okay, there we go. Yeah, I think it will really depend on how quickly he'll advance here. If he goes a bit too slowly, the Poison Wind Mortars will likely be able to finish off all of the ranged troops. But as long as he can advance relatively quickly, he should be fine. The Longbeards are very favored against the Skaven Slaves and Clan Rats. So we'll have to see. It's all about that speed. Of course, not a dwarf specialty, though. And
Yeah,
on the
no.
Skaven side, how do you feel like he can slow down the dwarf advance long enough for the Poison Wind Mortars?
I do think it's all about the summon usage. Just throwing summons in there piecemeal, maybe 1 or 2 Skaven Slaves at a time as well. Just trying to buy as much time as possible, because that is the name of the game. Poison Wind Mortars, they can do just such a ridiculous amount of damage that they can pretty much kill this entire dwarf build given enough time. So as long as the Skaven are able to use their chaff and their summons effectively, the Poison Wind Mortars should in theory be enough to carry the day. At the same time, a lot of this Skaven killing power is kind of devoted to single entities. That's what Throt and the Packmaster are so good against, is gooning out single entities. And there really isn't much for them to goon here. So the mobile source of terror will be nice, but it's not like these are anti-infantry specialists. I'm sure that Icepower would probably prefer to have chariots or death runners instead. But as long as he can deal with the Longbeards, I do think that he can probably get back onto the Dowie ranged with all of his chaff. And if he can do that, then the dwarves certainly will be in trouble.
Yeah, he'll just have to be very careful not to get his lord sniped out. They are moving along the right flank, and in doing so, it minimizes the number of ranged troops that can actually target them down. Initial Poison Wind Mortar shots coming down too, and it's going to be hitting 2 Longbeard units, which is really nice, since if the Skaven can actually win that frontline fight, they can push their infantry into the range units of the dwarves.
Yeah, and you can see that already huge damage going down onto the Longbeards. Now, these Poison Wind Mortars are being asked to do a lot. They kind of have to carry this game by themselves. However, that is surely something that Poison Wind Mortars won't have any trouble doing if they're able to get all of their ammunition off. Now, they are switching targets onto the ranged units of the Dawi, which is an interesting choice, choosing to go more directly to shut those units down. And now, an attack coming in on the flank with Clan Rats and the Packmaster and Throt actually advancing now, and Throt taking some huge damage with the Rune of Wrath and Ruin. He is using an early remoldered to ensure he doesn't get completely bursted. And actually, a pretty good job baiting that ability if he's able to escape, I think, because those Runes of Wrath and Ruin are going to be huge for the dwarves to be able to shut down these Skaven monsters.
For sure. Nevertheless, still a pretty nasty trade, taking him down to half HP and having to use his abilities, but we'll see if it buys him opportunities to advance in. Meanwhile, on the left flank, we're seeing some clan rats engaged onto the quarrelers, which will delay them nicely, but there's just so many ranged troops for the dwarves. It likely won't have that much of an impact.
This Plague Priest is going balls deep into this dwarf formation. If Pugnobon can actually turn and start bursting him, he can definitely take it down. It's literally in the middle of all of the dwarf backline.
Yeah, we're seeing some nice juking from Icepower though, which is actually wasting the ammunition of the dwarves. And this is turning out to be a very nice trade, except the Plague Priest is about to get routed, which is certainly quite bad given how important those summons are.
Man, but Pugnobon actually blobbing up a little bit with his ranged units here, just taking such an insane amount of damage from these Poison Wind Mortars. They are already each up to, looks like about 3 chevrons each. So huge damage coming in, and they still have about a quarter of their ammunition. With that being said, the Skaven are looking like they're starting to run a little bit thin. They're up on the balance of power, but if this Plague Priest can get bursted down, the dwarves might have an avenue back into this game.
Yeah, the Plague Priest is on the verge of routing again, but given that he is such a small target, it will be quite hard to kill him with quarrelers, but a point-blank shot comes in and finishes him off. It does look like he will be able to get a summon off right before he leaves the map, and along the right flank for the dwarves, actually some more clumped up infantry are taking a ton of damage from these Poison Wind Mortars.
Yeah, the Poison Wind Mortars just able to fire in freely all game. Icepower doing a great job of disrupting for them. Now, I do think that there's still 2 uses of the Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin. So if the dwarves are able to get a key pick onto Throt, that might be enough for them to start to come back into this game. Now, the Packmaster actually getting into the backline, starting to play quite aggressively with him and the Rat Ogres as some reserves basically coming back from routing and starting to pressure the backline as well for the Skaven. And it's definitely looking like the Skaven are getting pretty far ahead in this game at this point.
Yeah, with the dwarf backline compromised and the Skaven frontline continuing to hold, it seems like the DPS of the Longbeards just wasn't enough to push through and shut down the Poison Wind Mortars. Even actually almost running out of ammunition at this point is absolutely terrifying when it comes to this unit.
Yeah, and a little bit of clumping from Pugnobon definitely costing him quite a bit. It's easy to do, but it's something you have to be very, very wary of against units like the Poison Wind Mortar and all of the big AoEs in this game.
He did manage pretty well keeping Throt and the Packmaster out of his backlines, but given the summons, it was quite a difficult task. Especially since he did spec into Longbeards instead of Dwarf Warriors. It just means that he doesn't have any reserves to actually cover his Quarrelers in that case. So a little bit of a rough situation just based on the army setups. Of course, dwarves with their lack of mobility have a hard time versus mortars too. But a valiant effort. I think it could have easily tipped in his balance if he managed to break the Skaven front line.
Yeah, and we have to also give credit to Icepower with that secret agent rat going into the backline of the dwarves, summoning troops just to disrupt and force clumps of dwarf ranged. Definitely a pretty cool play. High risk, but it paid off, and with that, Icepower will be advancing to the semifinals against MaximusDecimus.
Yeah, and I that the dive in with the Plague Priest really was just crazy how much ammunition he actually wasted. With multiple volleys coming in from maybe 5 quarrelers by the looks of it, 5 or 4. He burned many thousands of points of damage in doing so. Now, looking at the Poison Wind Mortars, of course, they did amazingly well thanks to that defensive play, amounting to about a third of the Dwarf army in damage. While everything else didn't really make as much money, but doing their jobs protecting the mortars. Even the Packmaster and Thwart getting very little damage, instead acting as distractions. So well played, and I guess we'll be moving on to the next game now.
All right.
So to start
That's your
off
freebie.
with MaximusDecimus's Empire against Icepower's Dark Elves, we are seeing a mass infantry build. He's brought Volkmar and a light wizard, presumably with a net, and also a banishment. Should be very interesting versus any elite Dark Elf infantry. As for his own infantry line, it is very, very wide. Not only does he have many spearmen, just as chaff to hold the line and to stop cavalry, he's also brought the more elite flagellants and halberdiers. So he is more than ready to go against many of the cavalry units. A unit of Empire Knights just for a little bit of mobility, and a unit of Great Cannons to force the Dark Elves to engage. We're seeing his deployment really focusing on protecting these handgunners, as he can't afford to do so. So with that out of the way, what do we have for the Dark Elves?
So for the Dark Elves, we have Marathi coming in with Soul Stealer and all of her usual items. We will see one unit of Coldwind Knights, a couple of Dark Riders with shields, 3 in total, the Slaanesha's Harvesters, Doomfire Warlocks, a front line of a mix of Dread Spears and Bleak Swords, a total of 5 units spread out between the two. And then we have 2 Sisters of Slaughter and double Feral Manticore. So, definitely a slightly more narrow build. I think he will rely very heavily on the Sisters of Slaughter and excellent spell casting in order to break through this defensive formation of the Empire. Now, the Empire is relatively tight, so Soul Stealers can do a lot of damage. However, Soul Stealers are essentially an AoE Spirit Leech with a heal attached, so they don't do nearly as much to infantry as they do to cavalry, simply because they kill models rather than just doing overall HP damage.
And as we get the game underway, we are seeing not a lot of skirmishing from both sides, and it's just going to be setting up positions for Icepower, trying to find the best way to engage this Empire force. He has a good amount of time since there is only a single artillery piece, and he can also keep his cavalry behind this hill. It's actually a pretty nice use of the terrain features here. But instead now actually advancing, looking to get the fight underway as quickly as possible based on his movement orders. And this is to reduce damage from the artillery of the Empire.
Yeah, it looks like he's kind of splitting up. It looks like he might be gearing up for a flank overload. Maybe even kind of a double envelopment rather than attacking the front line. Now we are seeing Marathi's bound. What is it? I don't even remember the name of the
It's like
spell.
some sort of missile
Doombolt?
ability.
Yeah, the bound Doombolt coming in, killing 16 models off a handgunner unit. Pretty solid initial damage.
Yeah.
However, the Dark Elves are coming in relatively unmolested, with all of their cavalry overloading massively onto this one flank.
Yeah, and the timing, however, is slightly off, but it can't be abused too much. These handgunners will likely only get a couple extra volleys, and the main engagement is beginning along the side, the Empire's left flank. Big Soul Stealer comes in too.
Yeah, and really nice play, yeah. Threading the needle there, coming in on top of the handgunners immediately, and Icepower not doing the best job, or sorry, Decimus not doing the best job of protecting these handgunners, actually allowing the Dark Elf cavalry and even some infantry to slip through on top of them. Now Volkmar needs to get over there right away because he's a bit late to the party. And now this one Soul Stealer comes in, and it doesn't do a ton of work against infantry, but when they're all blobbed up like that, 5 or 6 units, it'll still be very substantial.
Yeah, and with the Sisters of Slaughter coming into, those infantry are going to be having a very rough time. Volkmar 2 getting gooned out by the double Manticore. He has a surprisingly low amount of melee defense, and this is a very rough engagement for him. Meanwhile, on the right flank, the infantry is just barely able to keep 2 handgunners alive, and they may tip the balance in the center fight with Volkmar.
Yeah, however, one Sister of Slaughter managing to break through, and it looks like they're going to be getting onto these handgunners here. A Manticore actually as well compromising each handgunner. So the Empire definitely in a lot of trouble. One of their flanks is completely collapsed, and the other one is looking quite rough. All they really have going for them is this massive center pocket, but that's not going to be enough to protect the handgunners, which are the real value targets in this build. And another huge Soul Stealer about to come down, and it's going to kill just so many models. It's all infantry, it's all relatively cheap, but it's very substantial damage all the same.
Yeah, they are still quite far from breaking thanks to Volkmar being in the fight, but at this point it is indeed just a game of damage, with the Dark Elves surrounding multiple infantry units of the Empire across the field, hitting them with cavalry, and finding generally very nice engagements. In basically both flanks and the center fight, it appears that the Dark Elves are performing quite well here.
Yeah,
Just
the Dark Elves massively ahead on the balance of power, and the Sisters of Slaughter also were able to get onto the Empire infantry without any trouble. And if you don't have Volkmar killing them, they're going to rip apart pretty much an endless amount of state troops. So definitely very nice for them.
Yeah, an expert use of flanking here, really. Volkmar and the Light Wizard were in the center of the Empire formation, and by going into the flanks, that was his main method of keeping those sisters alive, along with avoiding a lot of the handgunner damage too on the approach. So it's looking like a very decisive first win for Icepower here. Banishment
Yeah,
does go down.
Marathi, ooh.
And
It's
some
a
pretty
nice
nice AoEs.
soul fire, but yeah, this is a bit too far gone for Empire, I think, because they have hit army losses, and Decimus will withdraw. Marathi, despite not having value targets for her Soul Stealer, managed to accrue 2,600 value there, just because she hit so many blobbed up troops with those AOE spells. Definitely very solid.
Yeah, Slaanesh's Harvesters with their AoE too did very well. And the Sisters of Slaughter, although not getting in a ton of value, the fact that they were at such high HP means that they definitely could have made back their value uh, if the Empire had held out a bit longer. Oh, so there we go on the Empire side too. That very quick engagement, you can see the artillery really not doing too well, even worse than the handgunners, just because of the fast and decisive moves of Icepower.
Yep. Now, in this next game of 5 Dryads, including the Wraiths of the Frozen Heart, we have the Wardens of Sithril, Wildwood Ranger ROR with their anti-large. We have triple Deepwood Scout, just the regular variant, so no Way Watchers, going a bit cheaper here. We have triple Glade Rider with Spear, so going very cheap in the cavalry department. Not going to be a lot of killing power then. Certainly not able to stand up to the Bretonian cavalry at all. However, they will maybe be able to pressure the backline a bit. And then for the main value in this build, it's going to be an Orion and Ariel. Orion coming in with his regeneration and 2 of his AoE spells, and Ariel coming in with Soul Stealer, Tempest, and it looks like all the bound spells except for the single shot that reduces weapon strength. How about the Bretonians?
Well, for the Bretonians, we are seeing a very standard Bretonian build. expected in this type of blind army setup tournament. It's going to be a mix of archers, some cavalry, and a ton of peasants just to hold up the front line. The hero squad is going to be the classic Fey Enchantress double paladin, and this is the same army that we saw against the Greenskins earlier today. So with that out of the way, how do you feel about these two armies and how the engagements will go? They're deploying very close to each other.
Yeah, I definitely think that the Bretonians should have full battlefield control. There's no real reason why they should be losing much to the Deepwood Scouts. And I think it'll be very difficult for the Wood Elves because they don't have a lot of anti-large. Their whole army is relatively squishy, and they just lack battlefield control. So these Deepwood Scouts will probably be getting compromised very quickly. They will get some volleys into the Knights of the Realm here, but the Knights of the Realm actually going to be getting a uncontested charge onto Glade Riders, and across the front line, the Bretonians are going to be getting the better of most of these engagements. It's pretty much going to come down to Orion and Ariel just hard carrying this game, or the Wood Elves losing. As a nice Soul Stealer comes in, it's a couple Knights of the Realm and the hero squad of the Bretonians. And if the two hero squads fight each other straight up without any help from anything, I do expect that the Wood Elves will be quite happy about that. Now, the Wardens of Sithril in the backline actually doing quite a bit of damage into these Knights of the Realm, but at the same time, the Deepwood Scouts are already just immediately compromised, which will mean that the Wood Elves will lack range tools to contest the Peasant Bowmen and deal with cavalry.
Yeah, and with the front line of the Wood Elves and Bretonia sort of trading evenly at this point, it is going to be pretty rough if those archers can stay operational. Now, however, the Deepwood Scouts do also manage to stay alive too, but with Orion and Ariel not supporting the front line, it could very well tip heavily into Bretonia's favor. We're seeing now the Questing Knights charging into the Dryads and routing all but 2 Dryad units. This is actually looking pretty rough, having no front line here for the Wood Elves.
Yeah, they're not going to be able to protect these Deepwood Scouts for very long. They never would be able to, though. I'm not sure actually what their biggest priority should be here. Orion and Ariel can kill a lot just by themselves in melee if the enemy blobs around them. However, eventually you have to think they'll be getting dragged down just because of the numbers game here.
Yeah, the massive amounts of knights and continuous cycle charging is quite punishing even to Orion with his Cloak of Isha. Ariel too, not an amazing combatant. If Orion goes down, she won't be able to do much. So it's mostly relying on his damage and his AoEs. The archers too, for Bretonia, will be able to take down both targets as they are quite large. And this is going to be a really rough situation. There are multiple major threats for the Wood Elves, including the Hero Blob, but potentially if they can get a pick here, that could change the tide of things. A big Soul Stealer coming down too could, well, it's a nice help, but I'm still pretty worried for the Wood Elves.
Yeah, the Paladins actually should perform quite well here. They have a lot of anti-large, and their lack of armor piercing really not relevant considering that both of these heroes have only 30 armor. So they'll trade very well there, especially with support. Now, if they're engaged by themselves, that definitely isn't ideal, but you can see this Paladin will be getting support now from these Questing Knights and Knights of the Realm. And you have to imagine that unless the Bretonians accidentally blob up on top of this Wood Elf hero squad, there's no way that the AoEs will find enough damage to carry this game. With that being said, some really nice AoE usages, bursting down 2 of the Knight units. That's certainly a start, but Wood Elves will need to do a whole lot more in order to get back into this game.
Yeah, there are still many other cavalry units, and given that there is, I don't think any infantry left for the Wood Elves really, it's just going to come down to the 2 heroes, but they are doing quite well. A huge AoE actually routes off one of the questing knights and brings these Knights of the Realm down to 9 models. So actually trading out pretty effectively heading into the late game. Orion now at half HP, but he'll likely be able to get his Cloak of Isha and also begin healing. Now it
Yeah.
is quite important for the Wood Elves here, even though they do only have the 2 heroes left. There is a very important micro game that they'll have to play, which is whether or not they decide to heal Orion early to keep him alive, or to heal him later to maximize value on the Cloak of Isha. Just a few damage numbers there, but currently, given how behind he is, I'm not sure even the best maximization will help him out.
Yeah, I will say that healing Orion at all before he hits his regeneration cap is quite a blunder, I think. Um, you ideally want to wait as long as possible until he's down to 100 HP, even before you put Berry Wine onto him, or even Apotheosis, just because it actually ironically lowers his effective HP in the game when you use healing on him early. With that being said, you can see that the Peasant Bowmen are doing quite well, pumping a lot of damage into both him and Ariel. And Icepower being very patient here, just engaging with the one knight to hold these units in place while the Peasant Bowmen are allowed to fire in freely. Definitely very solid play, and doing a good job of crossing his T's and dotting his I's and just making sure that Maximus has no way back into this game.
Yeah, a big heal on 4 of his knights will be bringing them nice and healthy for the final engagement. And even though the Wood Elves do have a lot of AoEs, it won't really be enough with the continuous charges of the knights, not to mention the double Paladin and Fey Enchantress still being so healthy.
Yeah, and just a really good job not allowing the Wood Elves to get a huge Soul Stealer. Well, I say that he's starting to blob up a bit more now. um, but maybe he just feels like this game is over regardless, and he is free to do what he likes. And maybe he's actually correctly predicting that the Wood Elves are lacking in Winds of Magic after that recent apotheosis. No, a Soul Stealer will be coming in, and
Pretty good
Ice
splits
Power.
though.
Yeah, he dodges it with, it looks like his heroes. It will hit all of the cavalry, but I'm not sure how terribly relevant that'll be at this point, is Orion actually taking huge damage on the charge from some paladins.
Yeah, and this is really the main way to take him out. Having single entities hitting him for hundreds of damage per attack is really more than enough to finish him off. Even before he hits his healing cap, and with the healing of Ariel, it's just not enough. These the paladins coming in with the massive 70 charge bonus are will very easily take out Orion and Ariel in this situation.
Yeah, and just to analyze this game a bit, I think that the Wood Elves came in with a bit of a risky build. Wood Elves rely very heavily on their cavalry, and coming in with only 3 Glade Riders, definitely going to be a liability against some factions, and especially Bretonia. And Ariel does go down, and Icepower will be our first finalist, advancing 2-0 over MaximusDecimus. So, very impressive stuff for sure.
Yeah, and of course, it was also a pretty rough matchup for Maximus, but Icepower definitely did everything he needed to do to close out that game. In fact, Orion and Ariel in general, they do manage to get a lot of value a lot of the time, but generally, I feel like they end up getting surrounded and finished off in these late game situations. You put so much money into the pair that the rest of your army can't really hold up as well. We saw the Deepwood Scouts getting overrun, the Glade Riders having to save money on the cavalry front got completely run over by the Bretonian Knights, and the Dryads from there just weren't really able to pull it out.
We have Double White King with Scabscrath on top of horses. We have a front line of Quad Zombie, a Graveguard with Great Weapon, and the Sternsman ROR Graveguard, so relatively elite infantry corps there. We have double Blood Knight, a single black coach, and it looks like just 2 Fellbats in order to chase off and harass the Skaven missile troops.
Yeah, and for these Skaven, we are seeing quite a few missile troops, as we had covered earlier. It's going to be triple Giselle with mostly just a ton of infantry to protect them, but this time we are seeing a little bit more of an elite front from the Skaven. Vixtrin's Death Squad, a glass cannon type unit that will be able to defeat elite infantry quite handily with their armor debuffs and generally high stats. Let's see, Clan Vulcan Tail Slashers, actually pretty nice against the vampire counts, but not an amazing front line. There are no Council Guard here. And let's see, it looks like okay, there will be summons for the Skaven though, so there will be more of a delay through those. Using Skrulk, bringing his general, his usual kit, taking all of his abilities, an Assassin for sniping, and a Chieftain actually, just for that Guardian effect. So going for that single entity Footlord blob, and also not to forget some Poison Wind Globadiers too. A nice tech pick that has been taken recently in usual competitive tournaments. So not too surprised to see them here.
Yeah, he'll definitely have to protect those and rely on them quite heavily in order to deal with the Graveguard, I think. However, if he does manage to protect them, just that one unit of Poisoned Wind Globadiers can definitely do thousands of gold worth of damage into the Graveguard. Now we can see some nice juking from the Fellbats of Valkonos as they're getting targeted by Giselles, which have nothing else to shoot at right now, because the rest of the Vampire Count's army is still over this hill.
Yeah, and this is a good trade, but only if the Giselles actually run out of ammunition in the late game. And I feel like that may not be the case if they do actually manage to have ammunition for the whole game. It just means that these Fellbats are taking a little bit of unnecessary damage.
That's true. Maybe he doesn't think of them as very useful in this particular game. However, they are pretty much always good just for chasing off routing units and harassing the backline. So he might want to be a little bit more conservative with them. Now it does look like the Giselles are actually firing in onto zombies, not the optimal target for them by any means.
Yeah, and so far it seems like the ammunition of the Giselles are being used quite aggressively. But given that he's up against a rush build, you're usually not worried about ammunition anyways. So we'll have to see if that does come into play. The unit of Clan Rat summons do come down, and that will slow down the vampire count's advance by a decent amount. However, the actual core of the army in these Blood Knights will be able to move in faster if they so choose to, actually taking quite a bit of damage on the approach.
Yeah, protecting the Black Coach by keeping it over the hill from the Giselles is a cool play. Not doing the same for the Blood Knights is perhaps a little questionable, but he wants them to be in position to attack when the infantry closes in. Now, the Double White Kings, looks like they're kind of moving out ahead and baiting some Poison Wind Globadier shots. It won't be doing a terrible amount of damage to them, so it makes a lot of sense. And yeah, now the Graveguard's starting to get in near this Skaven front line. And the Skaven will have to do an excellent job of protecting these Globadiers, which are looking like they might get compromised quite quickly here by Vlad von Karstein.
Yeah, however, the right flank of Graveguard are looking to be facing up against the Death Runners. They'll be losing that fight. And Vlad actually retreating from the Skaven Hero Squad. They have a ton of debuffs, and they can be quite threatening to Vlad, but I think he does have a, a ward save ability?
Yeah, he hasn't popped it just yet. He might want to quickly, just because he has the Assassin's Trophy on top of him. Now, these Blood Knights taking a ton of damage. It is quite a big value pick, and the Black Coach still being held in reserve is actually allowing the Skaven to just fire in onto the Blood Knights and not have to worry about the Black Coach at the same time. not really providing enough threat overload here, I think, for the counts. Will allow the Skaven to systematically target the value pieces on this count's build. However, the counts are starting to break through the chaff on this left flank of the Skaven, and with that, the Jazales will start to get compromised.
However, a big volley from the Poison Wind Globadiers is going to be hitting all of the Vampire Count's elite infantry, which are core to actually shutting down the Skaven here. Two Jazales are still operational, and the fact that they did so much damage to these Blood Knights is going to be quite scary. On the Hero Squad front, we are seeing the Assassin actually getting routed though, and Skulk getting into a pretty nasty fight against Vlad. I think Skulk will actually lose it here, unless the Assassin can make some huge plays.
Yeah, a nice summon coming down, but Skrulk definitely in trouble. He's not nearly as good of a duelist as Vlad, though he isn't completely terrible. Now, Jazale's actually getting compromised from some zombies and from the White King and from some Blood Knights. And you have to imagine that the Black Coach will be coming in at any minute now. And without Jazale's to fire in at it, there really won't be a lot to deal with that particular unit, and it will be able to cycle charge freely for pretty much the remainder of the game.
Yeah, and if he is able to take out the Jazales before running out of infantry here, that will definitely have a huge impact. But I'm sort of worried about the Vampire Count's front line. Really, they only have the Sternsmen left and a few summons.
Yeah, and it looks like both of the Blood Knights are crumbling out of existence now, which that is a lot of gold to be losing here. And yeah, one crumbles completely, the other down to just 40 HP. It will be disappearing here in just a second. Now, the Black Coach is coming in. However, somehow the Skaven have actually managed to stabilize, and they still have two Jazales online. However, they are low on ammo, and they will need to stay online, which might be a bit difficult. However, the Black Coach actually charging straight into the Pit Fighters of Hell Deep is a little bit questionable. They might actually get caught up here and take a lot of damage.
Yeah, it will be able to peel a little bit for Vlad, but definitely not the greatest position for it. Although perhaps, just given that the ammunition is so low for these Jazales anyways, he doesn't really need to be diving in on top of them. Instead, the further Jazales with more ammunition will be posing a much larger threat.
Yeah, and the Black Coach actually getting the Rod of Corruption on top of it, which is a really nice play. It hasn't been in melee long enough that it has its damage resist, so it will be taking a ton of damage from that. Now, the Jazale's actually choosing to target the White Kings, the Hero Squad, instead of the Black Coach. And actually, the Black Coach getting a big hit from, I think that was Skrulk, or maybe the Chieftain, but it is getting bursted down incredibly quickly as a nice summon comes in, and the Black Coach is gone. It just gets
Wow.
bursted by this Hero Squad, the Chieftain and Skrulk coming in and laying down the business on that unit.
Yeah, very, very unfortunate. It was kept in reserve for a very long time, but when it finally did come in, it just really was not in the best situation to engage. Just taking way too much damage, given how many numbers advantage the Skaven has. Vlad von Karstein too, taking quite a bit of damage, but hitting
Huge
Skulk
scab
back.
scratch. My goodness.
Yeah, and this could set up a situation where Vlad can win through terror routes, but it's still going to be very rough for the Vampire Counts.
Yeah, actually, the Chieftain being alive or existing is quite big, because that means even if a lucky pick happened onto Skrulk, it wouldn't be enough to just immediately start routing this entire Skaven build. And yeah, Vlad actually, it looks like is starting to crumble out of existence, and with that, the Skaven will take game one. Really nice play from Human Boy.
Yeah, it seemed like his defensive formations and once again keeping those weapon teams alive really has a huge impact for Skaven, and that is usually what we do see when it comes to weapon team style builds. Not to mention his hero squad too did quite effective versus Vlad. It didn't kill him immediately, but it stopped him from simply marching into the back line to shut down the Jazales.
Yeah, the huge burst onto the Black Coach, and I will say that I think Valkonos may be a little bit too conservative with that, or maybe a little bit aggressive with the Blood Knights at the beginning. Um, Not being as effective as it could have been, because you kind of, when you have big value targets like that, you kind of want to threat overload where they all come in at once and the opponent can only get rid of one of them. But instead, sending them in piecemeal, allowing Human Boy to pick them off one at a time. Quite unfortunate, but at the same time, just excellent play from Human Boy for sure. Peeling off with summons, using Skrulk's abilities very well, peeling off with his infantry. The Death Runners ROR, actually a really cool pick.
Yeah,
I wouldn't
and paying
expect
for
them in
themselves.
this. Yeah, they managed to get 1,300 gold. Uh, Definitely very cool. They're not a unit that you see in a lot of matchups, so it's a bit risky probably to pick them in this particular tournament, but definitely paying for themselves there. As it looks like we might be getting a dwarf mirror. I'll go over Human Boy here. So we have Grom Brindal with Smoke Bomb uh, and Foe Seeker. We have Felix coming in with his heal, and actually he's coming in also with his abilities, which raise melee attack. Pretty cool. We have a single cannon. We have, it looks like, 2 Quarrelers and 2 Thunderers. We have a couple of Slayers, including the Dragonback Slayers ROR. A relatively cheap front line of 5 Dwarf Warriors and 2 Longbeards with great weapons. And that's about it. So, how about Valkonos' build?
Well, to counter or to contest Human Boy's build, it's going to be a similar style, but with some important variations. His hero squad is significantly weaker, bringing in Rune of Wrath and Ruin, not especially important in this matchup, although possibly useful against the heroes and avoiding them. However, he won't be able to fight them head on, so he's going to be relying on his infantry to do that instead, opting for a quite elite front line with 2 Iron Breakers, one the ROR Norgrimlings, Hammerers, and just a few Dwarf Warriors and great weapons to hold down the flanks. So I expect the blasting charges to do quite well, and the Thunderers to be putting in most of the damage. Dragonback Slayers too are great in the Dwarf matchup for contesting the ranged fight, but you'll have to really make sure that you keep them safe. And in this case, I feel like Slayers will just be running into each other.
Yeah, I suppose they're actually the ideal targets for each other, funnily enough. So they may just trade each other out of existence. Now, yeah, definitely a more elite infantry from Valkonos. I'm not actually sure how Ironbreakers do in this matchup in particular. I know that they are very solid in some matchups. They hold for a long time. I do somewhat doubt their killing power against the heavy armor of their fellow dwarves, though.
Yeah, they do come with blasting charges, but against missile fire, they do only have bronze shields, I think. Yep, they have bronze shields, so they will want to be avoiding that as much as they can. Thankfully, coming in from Human Boy, he doesn't have a ton of AP outside of his 2 Thunderers, so the Iron Breakers will be catching a little bit more of a break than they usually would. Okay, the battle is underway. The artillery will be picking its target to fire on. The Iron Breakers, Hammerers, or the Lords will likely be the best option here.
Yeah, I would expect the Hammerers to be the highest priority target. However, he could go for the Thunderers as well and try to get an advantage in the ranged game to have more of a long-term outlook rather than just immediately doing as much damage as possible. But it does look like he's going in on the Iron Breakers. Bursting them down will definitely be helpful, but he does actually switch targets now onto the Hammerers, which I think is a good idea. I think the Hammerers are a bit higher value here because they'll trade better into the highly armored dwarf infantry.
Yep, and some cannon shots actually flying over the Hammerers, hitting the Thunderers instead, but only taking out 2 models. So generally not making huge value at the start of the game with the cannon, and we're seeing Valkonos too pulling back his Slayers to make sure that his army doesn't take unnecessary damage from grouping up.
Now, actually, really cool positioning here from Human Boy. He is sitting right behind this hill, knowing that all of Valkonos' ranged are in these Thunderers, which require a direct line of fire. Only 2 Thunderers on Human Boy and 2 Quarrelers as well, which work much better with hills. So he's actually forcing this fight around the hills using his artillery advantage just to compromise Valkonos' range.
Yeah, and that alone might make these cannons worth it. Just having a very solid defensive formation, with the initial shots now going into those hammerers. It looks like he's setting up for a nice concave focus fire into them. And we'll see if that does take them out. They actually lead the vanguard, but are brought down to 66% HP. Now, just now, finally able to get the charge onto dwarf warriors, but quite battered.
Yeah, quite battered. However, they will be taking even more damage from these Thunderers, and yeah, they are down under half HP now. They will trade well when they're allowed to trade, but it doesn't look like Human Boy is going to allow them to get much value at all, as the Thunderer is focusing them down quite heavily, actually ignoring the enemy Thunderers for the time being. Now, the Ironbreakers throwing in their blasting charges actually getting huge damage onto these Longbeards with great weapons, which is a very choice target. These Longbeards with great weapons are going to be bursted down almost immediately. And so I think that we've traded relatively evenly now. And actually, Felix getting bursted down by some Thunderers as well. So some really nice target selection from Valkonos.
Yeah,
Starting
really.
to really chip away at the value pieces of Human Boy's army.
Yeah, he's really using that range advantage. Another huge volley on Felix is a very nice play. It actually gives him an advantage in the hero fight. And Slayers are engaging on Dwarf Warriors, which is a really nice trade for the Dwarf Warriors. And with his actual long position, long flank position, these Thunderers, he's actually trading pretty well in the ranged fight too.
Ooh, Felix already routing. That's actually huge. That means that Brindal will not be getting his healing, which he really was going to rely on over the course of this battle. Now, it looks like the other Brindal's evil red twin, coming in to duel the blue Brindal, and with the help of some hammerers and infantry and some thunderers, it does look like the red Brindal will be winning this very decisively.
Yeah, all Thunder is actually turning to fire in on him. One volley brings him down to half HP immediately, which is an insane lead. Even disengaging now with the red Brindle, and I think a Rune of Wrath and Ruin
Ooh,
actually
yeah, that is a
slowing
really
him down.
nice play.
Yeah, just a great play picking off the Lord, but when it comes to the Dwarf matchup, Lords, of course, are much less important. But nevertheless, a huge loss, and those Thunderers making short work of him. So that's the red side, Grombrindle, making it out victoriously, but he'll have to be careful himself from getting sniped from these Thunderers. He'll have a hard time advancing in on them, but with the remaining infantry, it looks like they're on their way to getting shut down.
Yeah, just wins across the front line pretty much from Valkonos, doing a great job picking his engagements and maximizing the value of his ranged pieces. It was a nice bit of positioning from Human Boy at the beginning to fight around the crest of this hill. The Valkonos' Thunderers managed to walk up the hill and at short range fire some devastating volleys into the meat of Human Boy's army.
Yeah, now with some nice concaves coming in from those Thunderers, he's shutting down the blue side's Thunderers, securing that range advantage using his Dwarf Warrior Great Weapons to really make sure that he can secure that advantage. And now the Thunderers, for Human Boy, have quite the predicament. There are still Ironbreakers on the map, and he can't really take them out before he secures enough of a range advantage. So in the late game, things could go quite badly. Felix too getting shattered off the map this time, and with the front line winning for Valkonos as we expected, we are now seeing these Thunderers likely to be getting pushed back.
Yeah, the cannon piece now getting shut down. It actually did really well this game, gaining a chevron, I think paying for itself. But as it goes now, I think that Valkonos should have no trouble closing this game out. That being said, some reserves coming in from Human Boy. I guess they were busy peeling off some of Valkonos' troops, maybe, or coming back from routing. I'm not entirely sure,
Yeah, they
but they
were
will be
actually
coming in
chasing
now.
Slayers.
Okay, they are coming back in now. Not sure if they'll be able to turn the tide of this battle, but it sure is something. Uh, if Human Boy is going to get back into this game, he needs to make a huge play now with his Dragonback Slayers, I think, getting onto the Thunderers. That's the only real way I can see him winning this game at this point.
Yeah,
But
from
man, the
there,
Thunderers, devastating damage onto these long grids with great weapons.
yeah, if he does manage to shut down the Thunderers of Valkonos, he will be able to focus down the Norgrimling Ironbreakers. So it's not over yet, but he is having quite the difficult time. These Thunderers, with their secure position on top of the hill, are able to take out the range units for blue, and the Quarrelers likely won't really be able to get enough damage here. Now the frontline fight is looking to be stalled out. That will likely hold for at least a while, except Brombrindle actually coming in, providing the main melee DPS, looks to be routing off the Dwarf Warriors.
Okay, this is weird. So there's a bit of a bug here, it looks like, as the Rune of Wrath and Ruin just not working onto the Dragonback Slayers, so they will actually be able to get onto the Thunderers regardless. It was a cool play. Unfortunate that it, for some reason, didn't work out. Um, However, the Dragonback Slayers will be getting peeled off by some Dwarf Warriors and the Norgrimling's Ironbreakers, who will trade quite well into the Slayers, I think. And we are starting to approach army losses as Valkonos takes a decisive lead in this game.
Yeah, the picks on the Thunderers is actually quite huge, but a little bit too late. Won't really be able to make enough of an impact.
Yep, and with that, Human Boy is going to withdraw to the ace match.
Whoops, accidentally hit the wrong button there. But yes, moving on to the next match. I think that was just some really nice play from Valkonos. Some good positioning and a really nice snipe on the hero front. If you look at his Thunderers, one of them actually made 2,400 gold value, more than actually almost paying off for the whole group of them. And that is really why we see this unit taken so much in this matchup. For Human Boy, his range units paid for themselves too, but sadly for the Quarrelers, just a little bit weaker on the range side. The cannon doing quite well, but given that his troops are starting to get compromised and he had to focus fire the melee infantry of Valkonos, it was just not as effective. And from there, it was just a solid win. We also saw some really nice Wrath and Ruins being thrown down and effectively shutting down major plays from Human Boy.
Detail.
Well, I'll start off with the Valkonos' Norska against Human Boy's Vampire Counts. It's going to be a pretty standard Norska build. You have the 3 Marauder Horse Masters. You always want to have a little bit of skirmish unless you have a specialized build. Some Skin Wolves, 2 for the mobility, and a bunch of Marauder Infantry. Some Berserkers too. And really the only strange thing about the build being these Marauder Hunter Javelins, which will actually, I think, be pretty important here once we cover the Vampire Count's army. The Famir
Yeah,
Balefiend of Shadows comes with his usual kit, and same with Wulfric.
yeah. So to match against that, we have Manfred Ron Karstein, interestingly enough. And man, what he actually has the Fate of Buna coming in, as well as Gaze of Nagash. So some off meta spells. He also, of course, has Raise Dead and Invocation, but definitely going to be using some interesting spells here. We'll see if he's able to make them effective. He might just ignore them, though, in this particular game. He also has a Mortis Engine, the Claw of Nagash ROR to be particular, He has a Banshee, which actually will not have to contend with any magic damage, so it could provide some trouble to Valkonos. We have a single White King with Scab Scrap, the Stearnsman Graveguard, a Graveguard with great weapons. It looks like 5 zombies for the front line, a single unit of Blood Knights, the Dire Pack, Dire Wolves ROR, the Feasters in the Dusk, Crypt Ghoul ROR, and a couple of Fellbats in the back.
Yeah, lots and lots of mobility. He should be able to chase off any troops. Although the triple Skin Wolf, triple Horse Masters will be a nice way to contest the mobility here. Which means it might actually go for the Norskin side. I'm not sure. How do you feel the skirmishing?
Well,
Will
Buna
start
going
out?
down onto Marauder Horse Masters right away. I was wondering if that might happen actually. Um,
Yeah,
it's
very interesting
so
play.
it's it would make sense. However, I have a problem with it because Buna does HP damage. It never takes models, and that's useful when you're gonna be harassing a unit. Um, However, there's actually nothing to kill the models here. However, the Buna routs them off immediately. If he
Yeah,
manages to somehow chase them, it will be a very worthwhile play. However, once they come back, they're going to have 44 out of 45 models left to fire in. So as long as they do come back, I'm not sure if that's the most effective use of magic. But
yeah.
if he's
However, if
able to
they
chase them
don't,
off the map, man,
huge. It's looking like he is actually setting up to do that while these zombies advance, while the left flank engages. So we'll get back to that in a second, with the Dire Pack taking a ton of damage from these Skin Wolves. Marauder
yeah,
Horsemen are doing good too. But how is the cavalry doing? Blood Knights actually trading out pretty effectively.
they're doing okay, but the Skinwolf Blob is going to be trading up, I think, without any invocations to babysit. With that being said, the Skinwolves are going to be pulling back here. One of the Skinwolves off, not able to assist in the fight, and actually one of the Skinwolves routes as well. So really nice plays from Human Voice so far. Um, he is able to gain a nice advantage towards the start of this game, I think.
Yeah, the
As
Blood Knights may go down given that they are surrounded now, but they traded decently well. We'll see how that goes as the mainline fight begins. Marauder Horsemen do actually come back, but not before taking a ton of damage. But the current situation means that there's no mobility for the Counts to really assist in the center fight here. They do have the Mortis engine, but they'll have to be careful not to get hit by Wolfric.
Ooh, yeah, Wolfric is coming in on top of it right now. And this one unit of Marauder Hunters with Javelins will actually do substantial damage to this Claw of Nagash relatively quickly. Now, a nice Scab Scrath comes in, does a lot of damage to Berserkers and some Marauders. But I do think that the Counts really need this Mortis engine to hard carry this game somehow. And I'm not sure if it'll be able to, given the mobility advantage for the Norskins.
Yeah, Manfred von Karstein does finally manage to come in, but the Mortis engine has already taken half of its HP and damage. The mobility too, these Horse Masters are positioned perfectly to continue pressuring the Mortis engine, and I would expect that to go down as long as it faces some focus fire.
Yeah,
Wolfric
now
too.
a nice job actually from Manfred getting into the backline, disrupting these Marauder Hunters with javelins, trying to save the Claw of Nagash for as long as possible. But the Skinwolves coming in and getting a surround on top of it now. Surely it'll be going down from this play.
Yeah, however, the right flank for Norska is beginning to collapse. Graveguard great weapons are great, and with the hero squad of the Counts, Wolfric is... he needs to be wary. He could get sniped out if he ends up in a bad position, but currently it looks like he has more than enough infantry support to really beat down this Claw of Nagash. Another Buna
Yeah,
does come down though on the Morauder Horse Masters. It seems like it's actually been a very effective method for taking them out.
yeah, and he should be able to chase those off with the Fellbats perhaps. But instead, the Fellbats coming in towards the center fight. One of the Skinwolves actually gets terrified by the now dead Mortis engine. Um, They should be able to come back quite quickly, though, and the Norskins, with the Mortis engine going down, have taken a substantial lead in this battle, I think.
Yeah, there isn't a whole ton of infantry left for the Counts. They do have a few Graveguard units left, but their single entities are getting heavily surrounded. Wolfric still at high HP too, Means that he'll be able to take extremely favorable engagements on them. For example, this White King actually getting taken out before really dealing any damage back to Wulfric. The Fimir Balefrene too coming into the fight, and he is actually one of the only sources for magic damage from Norsca to take out Banshees, but that won't really even matter as army losses kick in, and that's going to be game.
Yep, and so it will be Valkonos advancing to the finals to meet Icepower. A nice try from Human Boy. He had a good run in this tournament, actually took out Tank earlier, which is quite impressive, but he just wasn't quite able to make it work this time. And I do think he had a slight disadvantage with builds again, but I think the biggest thing here was that the heroes for the counts really just didn't do enough to justify their costs. I mean, there was about 4,500 poured into them in terms of gold, and all they really did was get one good Scavscrath and a couple of Bunas onto Horse Masters, so not really performing too cost effectively there.
Yeah, he also heavily lost that mobility fight, taking some engagements against the Skin Wolves and Horse Masters, but losing quite handily, even though it was pretty even early on. He lost his Blood Knights without them getting too much value, and also losing his dogs, the bats, and wasn't really able to chase off the Horse Masters going into the game. So that's going to be GG, and now we're moving into the finals for the Blind Man's Cup.
A relatively decent matchup for Valkonos given the builds. Which one would you like to go over now that we're in the game?
I guess I'll cover the Dark Elf build with Marathi, 2 Manticores for Icepower, a very strong single entity sniping squad. You'll just have to be careful to keep them safe, but with no range units, that could be rough with vampire counts. He's also brought some Dread Spears and Bleak Swords, along with a healthy amount of cavalry, elite and cheap, some Dark Riders, Lanesh's Harvesters, and Cold One Knights, and of course, the very elite Sisters of Slaughter, amazing verse infantry as long as they aren't getting pressured by things like cavalry. Marathi in the air with Soul Stealer and her, her missile ability, the Wand of Crydon, should be very good for any single entity fight that comes up. So with that out of the way, Dacder, how are you feeling about the vampire counts?
Well, the counts are coming in with Vlad von Karstein on foot. Looks like double White King with Scabscrath on horseback. 2 Fellbats in the air. A couple of Blood Knights. A Black Coach. Triple Graveguard, actually one of each. The Stearnsman, Graveguard with great weapons, and a regular Graveguard. And then 4 zombies just to provide a little bit of chaff. So a pretty solid, well-rounded counts build to be sure. The Blood Knights will have a pretty good time here. They aren't going to be contested very heavily in the cavalry engagements, I think, and they should be able to do some pretty good work here. Now, the Black Coach, also, if it's not gooned out by Manticores, it could do a lot of damage. I am thinking it could potentially get killed relatively quickly, though, if it gets trapped up. So we'll have to see. I think that actually might be the X factor for this game. How well the Black Coach does, whether or not it manages to get value, or if Icepower is able to goon it with his single entity squad.
Yeah, we'll have to see as the game gets underway. How do you feel about the skirmishing here? Of course, cycle charges are an option for both sides, but will it come into play?
Units. No range units on either side, so I wouldn't expect much of a skirmishing phase at all. Icepower, if he wants to be cheeky, could actually just go and attack the Fellbats, because he will trade well against them with his air squad. But it's not going to be particularly valuable either way. The Fellbats really don't have any targets in this game, other than just perhaps harassing this single entity squad and chasing off routing units. So I don't expect them to be an important piece of this battle. And of course, the Dark Elves will eventually have to advance anyway in order to fulfill the attacking role.
Yeah, now we are seeing he is indeed chasing off the Fellbats, but it does occupy his hero Marathi and also the Manticores. So he gives up the chase to make sure that they are in position to charge wherever they will be needed.
Yeah, I am. I'm not sure exactly where the Manticores will be able to find value here. One of their biggest assets is their cheap source of mobile terror, but there's nothing to terror out here because the Dark Elves, or because the Counts are undead and will not be routing. Now, a bit of a charge coming in here from the Dark Elves, and they will actually get caught, and it looks like this will be quite a nice trade for the Vampire Counts. Word of Pain going down is quite nice, and now Marathi and the Manticore coming in to assist here. This will actually be quite an important engagement, as one of the Blood Knights getting caught up with just a full surround pretty much on top of it, and the other Blood Knight coming in desperately trying to help out.
Yeah, and it does look like indeed he will be losing that 1700 gold value, throwing down some more AoEs to punish in the support coming in. And that's looking like a very solid lead in the cavalry to start the game. Single
Yeah.
entities here will be doing great, and the White Kings have a little bit to worry about.
Ooh, a huge Scabscraft, totally wrecking one of the Sisters of Slaughter. But the other Sister of Slaughter actually getting back, and the Black Coach is getting surrounded by Dark Riders with shields. Definitely not ideal for the Black Coach. And another Soul Stealer. Soul Stealer is quite effective this game. It looks like the other Blood Knight might also be getting taken down here, and if it is, then that'll be a decisive lead for the Dark Elves.
Yeah, and oh man, we are seeing that Manticore does land down, gets a very solid hit. And there aren't a whole ton of AoEs for the vampire counts, so the cavalry will be able to sit mostly grouped up along the Blood Knights, finally finishing them off. And this is looking like a very nice lead now.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's any real win condition for the Counts at this point. Um, the Manticore is being surprisingly effective, turning this cavalry fight on its head. Despite the Counts having much more elite cavalry, the Dark Elves win that battle very decisively. And now the Black Coach getting full surrounded by the Manticores and Dark Riders, and it should be getting taken out here. And with that, I think the last win condition for the Counts is being taken off the battlefield. As another nice Soul Stealer about to come down onto this single entity squad of the Counts. The double White King and Vlad, definitely a lot of killing power, but they need to pretty much hard carry this game all by themselves, and I'm not sure if they're up to the task.
Yeah, without any infantry support, they'll be doing pretty rough. Some zombies do come down, but with Sisters of Slaughter in the mix, they'll probably be dying before they actually time out. Lots of spears too will be able to pin down the White Kings and Manfred. And given the fact that the single entities of the Dark Elves are flying, they have really no fear from the single entities here. The Counts. Another Scabscrath goes down, not nearly as effective as earlier, only hitting a little bit of cavalry. And it appears like it's just closing out the game at this point.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the Counts really have a way to force their way back into this game. All they really have are these single entities, which don't have a lot of outplay potential, and there are no damage spells for the Dark Elves to worry about with a big blob. So I think that as long as the Dark Elves are able to cycle charge effectively with their double Manticores, this should be relatively trivial for them to close out.
Yeah, I think really the only play here would be the some extremely lucky shots on the single entities. But going past that, I guess we can move on to some game analysis, unless anything crazy happening. And we are actually seeing some troops getting terror routed by Vlad. So perhaps there is actually some potential here. His main worry would be these very healthy cavalry units.
Yeah. Um, it's the cavalry units and the Manticores, especially, which should be able to cycle charge with impunity, that I'm worried about for him. And we are actually seeing a little bit of lag here.
Yeah, so we'll take this pause time to go over some of the major plays that happened earlier. I do really feel like the mobility play and the maneuvering of cavalry for Icepower really secured a solid lead at the beginning of the game.
Yeah, he did a great job of flank overloading and forcing a big cavalry engagement there, utilizing his advantage in numbers and mobility, and coming in with some really nice rear charges from Marathi and the Manticores, as well as some great usage of AoEs with Soul Stealer, just to really turn the cavalry fight on its head. Despite Valkonos investing more heavily in cavalry, Icepower managed to win that fight very decisively, and with that, he took a major edge in the game, and Valkonos will be withdrawing. So Icepower up 1-0 in this final.
Yeah, doing quite well there. We look at the damage value of the Blood Knights, they did not pay for themselves, even if you combine their values. Meanwhile, the cavalry for Valkonos, the Cold One Knights, actually getting crazy damage, up to 1700. For Icepower. So very well played there.
The Fey Mortis Strain, I think, is really what it'll come down to. If the Fey can get like a few thousand damage value with her Mortis Strain on top of the elite Dwarf Infantry, that should be enough to turn the battle on its head. But she will need to be very careful not to get killed by that infantry or by Thunderers.
Yeah, Grombrindle 2 and the Rune Lord, two sources of slows. And we're seeing a brutal formation taken up against Bretonia. Knowing that there aren't really going to be any trebuchets here, towards a very tight defensive formation. Only problem being is that these archers, peasant bowmen with pox arrows, will have an easier time shutting down the Dragonback Slayers. So a little bit of a trade-off there, but I think it could very well be worth it, given the fact that the Bretonian cavalry won't be able to effectively cycle charge.
Yeah, definitely. The peasant bowmen don't have really any AP. They have some of the worst AP values in the game. So if they're not firing in onto the Dragonback Slayers, they will not do much damage. I mean, even Thunderers are shielded with 80 armor, so the peasant bowmen will do very little damage to them. Now, that's not to say that it's entirely negligible, but it will take a really long time for the peasant bowmen to get substantial value.
It just depends on if they can hit those Slayers, really, but the positioning of the Thunderers may very well pull them back. This is going to be a very tough defensive formation to pick apart, so we'll see how that goes. Let's see, the Runesmith and Grombrindle are actually deployed very far to the left. We'll have to see if they're actually forgotten there. That would be extremely unfortunate.
Yeah, let's kind of hope not. No, they will go into the main formation. Yeah, that would have been something.
Yeah. Now, let's see. The army is mostly Ironbreakers, and it really is just the single entities for Bretonia that can take them out, or a ton of archer fire. And as long as those guys are kept safe, and it looks like they will be, that makes things very, very tough. Yeah, from the Bretonia side, how do you think the plays will go down here?
It really does depend on the Fey Mortis Strain. I think you have to try and get as much value as you can from the peasant bowmen before you commit to anything big. You have to try and bog down the Ironbreakers with your peasant mobs to prevent them from shutting down the men-at-arms from the very get-go. It's actually surprisingly going to be quite important, I think, dodging blasting charges with men-at-arms, because you do need the men-at-arms to hold for a while just to maximize the Fey's Mortis effects and to provide an anvil for the hammer of the questing knights. If the questing knights and the Fey are able to sit on top of the heavily armored dwarf infantry, then that'll probably be the path to victory for Icepower. Now, we will see, of course, Valkonos completely giving up battlefield control here, as expected. Icepower trying to get a full surround. However, of course, one entire flank of Valkonos will be off limits just because of the nature of this map. So that's quite nice for Valkonos, using defensive terrain very effectively. And we will start to see missile fire exchanged here.
Yep, it means that the engage will have to happen sooner rather than later. Focus fire going down onto the Dragonback Slayers, but the infantry for Bretonia is looking a little bit flimsy. Some blasting charges will come in, but an okay charge from the Knights of the Realm actually failing, hitting the braced Dwarf Warriors. Not too great, but they don't take too much damage.
Yeah, a
nice
Chalice of
spell and
Potions
dodge.
thrown down, a very bold Chalice of Potions, we'll say, is able to be dodged very easily by Valkonos. Now, actually, it's the Dragonback Slayers that are getting targeted rather than the Thunders by the Peasant Bowmen, which I think is a pretty solid play. The Dragonback Slayers will be taking a ton of damage very quickly. And now the Fey Enchantress getting on top of some Dwarf Warriors, going for the Mortis effects. And yeah, a Wrath and Ruin going down onto these Knights of the Realm. However, they are able to escape relatively well through their own peasant mob.
Yeah, a little bit of lost Wrath and Ruin there, and with the gap actually forming in the back lines, we see some Knights of the Realm actually closing in to shut down these Thunderers.
Yeah, however, Knights of the Realm without any AP values will take quite some time to actually kill the Thunderers, and this may be their doom, getting in that aggressively. Not to say that it isn't worth it, but definitely a high-risk play. Now, the Companions of Canal coming in also onto some Thunderers, and Icepower doing a pretty good job of firing in with all these Peasant Bowmen. He needs to watch out. If Valkonos pushes up with his Norgrimling's Ironbreakers, he might actually be able to get a cheeky volley off into these Pox arrows. However, for the time being, the big play here is the Companions of Canal being taken out. That is one of the major sources of AP damage in this Bretonian army, and they are down to only 1200 HP at this point, taking a ton of damage and pretty much being routed off the battlefield at this point.
Yeah, 3 of the Thunderers are still able to stay online and continuing firing, and continuing to fire, but that may change now with the center line of Dwarf Warriors actually on the verge of routing. If they do get off the map, it gives a very nice opportunity for Bretonia to once again shut down the Thunderers. It looks like Grombrindle too, a little bit out of position, but not really too threatened by any of the forces here. He'll just need to find a good position to actually get some value.
Your Chalice of Potions going down. It might actually get huge damage on Norgrimling's Ironbreakers. No. Dodged at the end and actually nukes a peasant mob. So, unfortunate, but, you know, not that big of a deal for the Bretonians. I think the Bretonians' big story here, the one thing that's going quite well for them, is the Fae is sitting in relatively undisturbed, getting her Mortis effect across a lot of Dwarf infantry, which is relatively tightly packed. And now also some Thunderers getting compromised, but man, the cavalry is just not able to really do damage fast enough to shut down the Thunderers for any meaningful period of time. And they are getting bursted even by blasting charges.
It's the problem with the Knights of the Realm. They just simply do not have the AP to really take down these units. Thunder is extremely hardy as long as they don't run up against AP, but we are now seeing the single entity squad for the Bretonians have collapsed the left dwarven flank, and they are looking to get into a pretty nice position, moving in to Mortis. Basically the rest of the dwarf infantry here, they'll just have to be careful not to get hit by Grombrindle, who is actually a little bit out of position right now.
Yeah, and it's worth noting, by the way, Grombrindle does magic damage, and the Fae has a huge magic resist. So Grombrindle will be struggling to actually kill her.
Yeah, however, going for the Paladins instead, and we still have a unit of half HP Norgrimling Ironbreakers. Nothing to scoff at, as they are extremely high melee defense, and without any ammunition left on the archers, they could actually hold for quite some time. 2 units of Thunderers too are actually continuing to stay operational, shooting at any knights that go onto them in the back. And it looks like the dwarves have actually secured a second defensive position going into the late game.
It actually does seem like they're starting to run low on troops, though. And all the Bretonians really need is Chaff to screen for the Fey Enchantress to get her Mortis effects down, and even the Peasant Bowman will be able to do that relatively effectively in this late game here. Now, it will take the Fey hard carrying at this point, but it's still a relatively even battle because she is certainly capable of that.
Yeah, double paladins too are able to shut down the Thunderers, and it does look like this is the intent for Icepower. He's maneuvering to get into the back lines, and this will buy some more time for his knights. But Grombrindle is moving into support. We'll have to see how these single entities trade out against each other here.
Rune of Wrath and Ruin going down onto the Fey Enchantress, and also Smoke Bomb as well.
Oh, very
She's going to
nice
be
play.
taking a fair bit of damage there, but not a ton because of her magic resist. Grombrindle kind of struggling to burst her, but over time, this damage will add up, and actually the Runesmith as well, getting on top of her, and her leadership starts to go down as she drops to 2100 HP.
Yeah, she struggles to push through, trying to force path her way out, but runs into the very high mass of the Norgrimlings and is caught up, just stopped dead in her tracks. However, Grombrindle is still pretty far away, and she may still be able to escape. We'll have to see.
Yeah, a regrowth onto the Fey might be nice at this point. Actually, Grombrindle coming back and getting a big hit onto Fey Enchantress there, as the Thunderer is also firing in onto, I think they're firing in onto the Fey as well, just trying desperately to kill her, because if she goes down, then the game will almost certainly be over.
Yeah, however,
Now,
she does manage to escape.
yeah, she does, and she'll get back into all of these Peasant Bowmen, which are now coming in. The champions of Bretonia are these Peasant Bowmen coming in and meleeing now, just trying to provide just screening and chaff and tankiness for the Fey Enchantress to drain down the remainder of this dwarf force.
Yeah, and the Paladins have actually split up from the Fey Enchantress, which is a very nice play. Grombrindle can only be in one place at a time, and now that he's gone for the Fey Enchantress, the Paladins, very annoyingly, actually charge into the Thunderers. So we're seeing some fantastic play from the Bretonians, but will it be enough? Runelord now getting caught up. Looks like he will actually be getting sniped out. And the constant Mortis effects have actually worn down the Iron Breakers by quite a bit.
Yeah, however, Grombrindle has no fear popped, allowing the Runesmith to survive this attack, as pretty much all of the chaff breaks at once from the Bretonians. The Peasant Bowmen were never going to hold for long. And with that, it looks like the dwarves are starting to take a pretty decisive lead in this game.
Yeah, actually a pretty massive swing with that mass route. They really needed that chaff for their single entities to continue fighting, and now they're going to have to retreat with the Thunderers peppering them as they try and recoup some of these Peasant Bowmen.
Yeah, now the Bretonians trying to regroup out at the edge of the Thunderer's range, but they will be getting some nice chip damage here with some volleys into the Paladin. Now the Bretonians do come back from routing. Almost all of their chaff actually will eventually. So this second wind is pushing the balance of power back towards the middle. However, it still seems like the dwarves are at quite an advantage here.
Yeah, taking up a nice defensive formation. They actually still have 3 of their infantry troops still sticking in the fight, and they have extremely high leadership. Even the Hammerers at basically no HP still have, let's see, they still have 27 leadership, which is, yeah, you'll basically have to kill them off to actually get them off the battlefield. And by staying in the fight longer, they buy a lot of time for these Thunderers to continue firing.
Yeah, and now Icepower trying to dodge the Thunderers, but because they are gunpowder units, it'll be very difficult. Trying his best, but they still will get some decent chip damage onto it. Looks like the Paladins.
Yeah, and he can still avoid a little bit of the damage, so it's definitely still worth it to try dodging. But like you said, a much less effective. Now Fey Enchantress is moving in. Mortis Engine effect once again active, but multiple slows coming down, Grombrindle slowing down, all of the heroes. Looks to be in a good position to take out the Paladin. Instead though, actually chases a Fey Enchantress. She does manage to escape, but dives back onto the Paladin, lands a very solid hit, and it looks like that's going to be it for the single entities for Bretonia, if the second hit connects.
Yeah, ooh, 90 HP, and that will be dragging one of the paladins down. Now, some of the dwarves are routing. However, the balance of power swings very heavily into the favor of the dwarves as the Bretonian chaff starts to once again melt away, and the real killing power in the paladins is getting chipped down as the Fey Enchantress also actually quite low now, on the verge of routing from some Thunderers, and that will be game 2 going to Valkonos, sending us to a final ace match in this tournament to decide the winner.
GG. Oh my gosh. That actually got pretty close there coming down to the end, but given how hardy the dwarf units are and how resistant they are to actually routing off the map, it did seem to still be a pretty decisive victory. Both Ironbreaker units making a ton of value for themselves, and once again, Thunderers making 2400 damage value. Just insane numbers that I am not used to seeing usually.
Yeah, they did a great job. And now in this final game, it'll actually be Skaven against Norska. So another matchup where I'm kind of concerned for Icepower. And
I guess I'll begin on the Norskin side, why not? And it's going to be the ace match between Valkonos and Icepower. Norska against Skaven, bringing in 3 Skinwolves, 3 Marauder Horsemasters, a unit of Javelins, and a ton of infantry. Well, a medium amount of infantry to back them up. Just some Marauder Berserkers. And for the leadership, going to be that Fimir Bale Fiend, bringing in the usual spells, some AoE, his own magic damage, armor, sundering, a very good single entity duelist, along with Wolfric, a beast himself with his, what is it called? With his Sea Fang ability. There are 2 major AoEs from Norska that the Skaven will have to try as hard as they can to avoid. So that out of the way, what do we have for the Skaven?
so the Skaven are coming in with Throth the Unclean, as well as I believe it's a Pack Master. Yep, with that double Brood Horror killing squad. He has a Plague Priest with the usual summons, a whole bunch of Skaven slaves, some clan rats, just a bunch of chaff in general. Actually, it looks like it's relatively heavy on the clan rats here. It looks like it might be 6 or 7 in total. We have a double Poisoned Wind Mortar, a couple of rat ogres, only 2, and that seems to be about it. So a very simple build. Just protect the double Poisoned Wind Mortar and hope that they kill everything is pretty much the name of the game here. It will be a bit tough. However, it's certainly possible for the Skaven to win this one.
Yeah, there are 2 opportunities for him to take, or actually 3 venues to win it out here. One is to snipe out Wolfric with his double Pack Masters, or double Brood Horrors. Not exactly an easy task, but if he does manage it, it secures an extremely strong lead. The other is to win the infantry fight using the Poison Wind Mortars, and that will allow him to take a nice advantage with his Pack Masters cycle charging, or also to take out the mobility for Norska, chasing off the Skinwolves with the Brood Horrors. But this is expected to be much more difficult. That would more be a misplay from Valkonos, I think, if that does happen.
Yeah, I think it'll mostly actually be about zoning out the mobility for the Norskins. The fact that it's Horse Masters and Skinwolves does mean that it's a relatively narrow build for the Norskins compared to what they might usually like here. There will definitely be some value targets for the Poison Wind Mortars to fire in at, and a lot of it will come down to whether or not the Norskins blob up for the Poison Wind Mortars, because of course, if you do blob up for them, they will get crazy value very, very quickly.
Yeah, now in the time it takes for the mortars to get in range, we are seeing some counter skirmish using the Brood Horrors here, just to make sure that the Horse Masters aren't hitting the front line of Skaven slaves. With enough dodging, he does actually manage to avoid most of the javelin fire, and that saves his front line just a little bit of damage, a very minor win coming in for Icepower. But the major engagement underway, let's see how that goes. Mortar shots go down and a summon to hold up the front line. Seems to be going pretty well, but some Skaven slaves do get caught out.
Yeah, so the Poison and Mortars actually focusing on the Horse Masters at the beginning rather than the infantry, but it does look like they're going to switch targets now very quickly. Um, Actually, a pretty nice volley there, hitting some Skin Wolves as well. Now, one Skaven Slave is taken out, but another Skin Wolf off on the right flank of the Skaven is looking like it might get caught out by some Brood Horrors. It will pull back, though, quite effectively. And Norska definitely playing very conservatively at the start here. They probably do want to get in as quickly as possible just to mitigate the effects of the mortars, but they have to be careful not to lose anything too carelessly at the beginning, and they are being very careful about that. Um, Starting to wrap around the one flank as Valkonos asking whether or not this is considered white line camping, which is an interesting question.
Yeah, we'll have to decide after the game, but for now, it will
Yeah,
have to be played out. And it's looking like the infantry for Norska is having a pretty hard time. They are actually getting, especially with the summons coming in from Skaven, are getting routed off rather quickly. Skin Wolves do finally manage to break through the Skaven lines, and they are diving straight into the Poison Wind Mortars.
yeah,
However, diverting slightly and yeah, actually retreating now.
yeah. They are being zoned out by Rat Ogres very effectively. Nice play from Icepower. Now the front line is finally getting broken through thanks to the AOE spells of the Norskins and Wolfric's Terror. And with that, the Norskins might be able to get onto these Poison Wind Mortars. However, in the back, the Horsemasters still being zoned out, and just really a great job of zoning and disrupting this Northkin advance from Icepower over the course of this entire game so far.
Yeah, and Pack Masters are coming in. It looks like they will be routing off these Berserkers, and the Poison Wind Mortars are still able to fire. Big Pendulum comes down, but actually misses quite heavily, and it's looking like the Skaven are pulling in a pretty strong lead.
Yeah, and now they're going to try and goon out Wolfric here with Rat Ogres and the double Brood Horror. And this definitely looks like Wolfric might be getting in a ton of trouble here as he's getting pinned up against all of these spears and the double Brood Horror and Rat Ogres. And if Creature Killer goes down as well, that will give a ton of bonus versus large as well as immune to psychology, which is going to be very critical here. And you can see Wolfric by himself, surrounded by about 1,000 rats right now. An AoE spell could be big here, but it won't be enough, I think, to save Wolfric at this point.
Yeah, spell does come down. Actually, hits the infantry for a ton of damage, but Wolfric getting down low and routing off basically spells the doom for the Norskins here. They don't really have the leadership or the single entity fighting prowess to finish off the Brood Horrors, and this will likely be game even if Wolfric does manage to return. Skaven front lines are beginning to collapse though, but the Poison Wind Mortars are still able to fire. They do a lot of damage to the Marauders and the Berserkers, and it's looking like both infantry, or for both sides, the infantry will be running out, and it'll just come down to the Skin Wolves versus the Brood Horrors. The Fimir Balefiend comes into fight too, but he won't really be able to carry it out. Now, I do think, well, yeah, we went over mostly how the play went, but I think the deployment did seem a little bit close to that mountain.
Yeah, there was certainly not a lot of space in between the edge of that formation and the mountain. We'll get in contact with the admins. We are not actually adminning this tournament; we're just casting it. So
Yeah, so we'll get into that, and then we'll also see if the players how they want to resolve it. Yeah, so once again, for those watching on YouTube, we are indeed replaying the map, since it was a rule break preventing a flank using the terrain that was touching the edge of the map. Just following the banner rules, and by the choices of the admins, it is going to be a replay. For us, it does mean that we get more Warhammer content, and we shall see how this match gets played out once again. Now, yeah, how do you feel like things might change going into this second game here?
Well, we will probably see the same sort of idea from Icepower, trying to zone out the mobility of the Norskins with his brood horrors and rat ogres, while trying to kill basically everything with the mortars. The Norskins have a bit more freedom in terms of deployment here to vanguard and to get around the flanks of the Skaven at the very beginning. And I will expect them to try and make full use of that to maybe even get a full surround right from the very beginning of the map. But we'll have to see. It looks like maybe a bit more conservative on the deployment so far. And yeah, so this is a pretty nice defensive formation from the Skaven, using the forest on the one side to conceal a couple spears and have some rat ogres. It will disrupt the skin wolves if they try and move in from that flank. And on the other flank, of course, there are some terrain blockers as well, which will slow the Norscan advance.
Okay, and I think the army deployments should be good for anyone worried about this terrain feature in the center. It is not touching the edge of the map, so it is legal to use defensively, much like Glacial Lake. So let's see. Yep. I think we should be good, but do you want to check? You want to check for just to triple check that the rules are indeed being followed here.
I will ask for him.
And it looks like it is good. Alrighty, so moving on into the game. Let's see how this plays out. So, it will very much be based on the flank, but there's still the huge problem for Norska that the infantry summons will slow them down, and they will be taking a ton of damage on the approach. The Berserkers will do nice versus Skaven slaves, but Plague Monk summons and the Poison Wind mortars will really be able to do a lot of damage. So in the second game, he may be able to get a nice flank in around the Poison Wind mortars, but the second task of actually shutting down the Rat Ogres will come into play.
Yeah. Now, the Brood Horrors, I wonder if they'll get as aggressive as they were at the beginning of the last battle. An immediate Clan Rat summon coming out, which makes a lot of sense, just trying to zone for as long as possible. The Poison Wind Mortars last game actually began by focusing on some Horse Masters, but this time they'll be going immediately in onto the Marauders. And actually, man, a nice volley manages to catch 3 Norscan units with just the one hit because of the innate inaccuracy of the mortars. Really, really devastating there.
Yeah, and a very nice start. Marauders taking a lot of damage, but the flanks are beginning to close in. However, the spears, Skaven Slave spears, will be able to stall for a good amount of time. And it's looking like the big engagement is starting. Wulfric is charging in, and the Packmaster and Throt are positioning to dive in on him as quickly as they can, getting a solid charge on top of him. With a Rat Ogre summon too, actually intending to slow him down.
Yeah, and Creature Killer getting popped as well. This could be a really big play. However, I don't think Wulfric is nearly as vulnerable as he was when he was picked off last game. And a really nice pendulum going down, clearing out a lot of this this Skaven chaff. Now, the Marauders here did actually break, so Wulfric is somewhat isolated here, as well as the Skin Wolves. But Berserkers are coming in now to try and assist. Some more nice Plague Monk summons coming down in the backline, though, pretty much, with this very aggressive Plague Priest, which seems to be an Ice Tower specialty. And the Skin Wolves on the one flank getting caught up by the Pit Fighters of Hell's Deep and getting picked off very quickly and effectively. Now, the center of the Norskins are breaking, and it looks like the Skaven, once again, taking a very decisive lead in this game.
Yeah, just really winning on the infantry fight. and using their remaining infantry to ward off anything diving on the mortars. They are doing a great job versus marauders on both flanks, but Wulfric does manage to stay alive since the two pack masters did disengage, and he may get a solid pick on the Plague Priest.
Yeah, that would certainly be quite nice. However, he will struggle, I think, to kill the Brood Horrors at this point, though with some Skinwolf support it might be possible. Um, he also does have Hunter of Champions, which he can use on actually all of the value pieces here, because Packmasters and Throt are both hero units, so they can be Hunter of Champions. However, knowing this, Icepower pulling back, playing conservatively, trying to kill off the remainder of the Norscan infantry before committing to any further engagements. And these Clan Vulcan Tail Slashers actually doing very well into these Skinwolves, might be able to rout them off and killing several models.
Yeah, and the Norscan mobility is really just falling quite quickly due to those rat ogres, with the poison wind mortars down to almost no ammunition. It's a very good sign for Skaven. And once again, now that a lot of the mobility has been cleared out, the Packmasters or the Brood Horrors charge in on Wulfric once again, just slowly chipping him away and trading extremely effectively.
Yeah, they really are extremely good units into Wulfric and into Mammoths, and really just in general. Now, Hunter of Champions onto Throt the Unclean, going for this kind of desperation pick. However, Throt is very patiently going to just pull back, wait that out, and Wulfric unable to chase because he's caught up in the Clan Vulcan Tail Slashers. And it definitely looks like the Skaven are in a very commanding position in this game.
Yeah, just that extra mobility really turning the tides in this battle. Using the Brood Horrors to really punish the slower, more bulky Wulfric, and with once again a solid infantry advantage, this is looking heavily disfavored for Norska here. Outside of some crazy AoEs and a mass rout on all of this infantry, it's looking to be game.
Yeah, and the Packmaster and Throt should be able to come in now and presumably clean up Wulfric and this Premier Caster, especially with some help coming in from the Pit Fighters of Hell's Deep, who will be pinning in Wulfric, and actually it looks like army losses might be hitting now. And yeah, so GG. Icepower going to be taking the Blind Man's Cup.
Yeah, with a solid victory against the Norskins. The Throughout the Unclean plus the Packmaster is just such a really nice mobility combo. We saw them bouncing back to defend the backline, and then cycling around to get some just really nice cycle charging down on Wulfric. Throughout the entire game, eventually it did pay off, with Wulfric getting killed off, or at the very least routed off, just due to the consistent poking damage. And this was enabled, of course, thanks to these poison wind mortars at almost 4,000 damage value between them. Just a very decisive win.
Yep,